What's going on, guys? Back with another video. So let's talk fishing. This one today is about bank fishing and the challenges that come with it, and how we can become better bank fishermen. Maybe some mistakes that we're doing. So the first one is about cast distance. When you first show up at a body of water, whether it's a river, a stream, a lake, a creek, it doesn't matter. And when you first walk up there, you'd be surprised how many fish are actually sitting at your feet. Um, a lot of people overlook this. And so don't cast just as far as you can. If you cast that thing 40 yards out or at the target that's way far away, you could get hung up, you could catch a fish, and by doing either of those things, you could ruin your chances at catching the fish between you and where you cast. So if you were to get hung up and you bring a big limb all the way back, you drag it all the way back to you, or you spend a bunch of time trying to get it unhooked.
Look at him down there whipping that water into a frog. Beat the water, Howard. Would you come out there drowned or something?
Or you bring a bunch of leaves or grass or muck. Or if you were to catch a fish and you bring that fish back and you're fighting that fish for that 40 yards, all of those things disrupt the environment, and every fish that's between you and that point are going to have their alarms raised. They're very much less likely to bite at that point. So don't just cast as far as you can, cast close and then eventually go outward. So first cast to your close to your feet, cast a little bit out, and work your way out to those farther points. Um, Point number two, before going all the way to the water, be stealthy, be quiet. So don't just run up, stomping your feet, stepping on leaves and limbs. Be quiet. Another thing I would say about this is to stay back. You can cast 20 feet up ahead of you. So before you go all the way down to the water, stay back and cast up there to where you're eventually going to stand, and then fan out before you get all the way up there. There could be a fish sitting there, and if you walk all the way up on it, your chances of catching that fish are very unlikely. And so cast before he knows you're there. Cast before he sees you. And those that will very much increase your chances of catching fish right there. Um, Another thing, this is a big one. Don't let fear win.
Like I always said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself.
This is a very difficult one. We all do it, even when we're in boats. But definitely on the bank, it's another challenge because a boater can, run his boat up pretty darn close and get something that he's hung up. A bank angler doesn't have that opportunity. A bank angler has to swim if you want to get it unstuck. So I understand the caution when you're trying not to get stuck, but what I would say to that is practice. Practice casting as much and as often as you can. So go out in your driveway, your front yard, your backyard, even your basement or whatever, and just practice casting. Practice underhand casts that are flipping. Practice overhand casts, sidearm casts. Just practice all those casts and do 20, 30, 50, 100 in a row, and get used to what your rod does, what your reel does, what different baits feel like. You can tie on a lead weight or anything like that and just cast it out into that onto that concrete on your driveway or in the grass, and get used to set something out there with like a cup or a rock or something like that, and cast to that point over and over and over again. And when you get good, you're going to have the confidence to fish in those tight areas, whether it's a dock or bushes or a lay down, whatever. And you're not going to avoid it because you think you're going to get stuck. You're going to go ahead and cast to it because I hit that rock in my yard 100 times in a row. And that confidence and that ability to be accurate will prevent a lot of hangups. If there's a lay down right there and you cast, some people will cast to the point that it gets hung up. But if you're good and if you've practiced, you can put it on the point where it won't. and still be able to catch the fish that's sitting there by it. So that's very important. Another part of it is to keep practicing, but this would be something you do in the water, is pay attention to your line and how your bait moves when it is hung up and the ways to get it unstuck. So there are things you can do to get it unstuck. You can do the slingshot method. You can just pull straight back, different things to try to get it. But the main thing is you don't want your hook to ever penetrate something that would hang it up. And a lot of times our baits will get hung up before the hook really has penetrated. So if you're using a Texas rig worm or you're using a spinner bait or you're using a crankbait, a lot of times the nose of the bait will be stuck. It will not be coming over a limb or a lay down, or it's stuck between two rocks or anything like that. And if you just pull straight back, the pressure will pop it up over, and that hook point will never dig in to what is hanging it up. And that's a huge deal, and that's a big part of being able to not get hung up. Um, so that's those are things I would say is just practice casting, practice getting your bait unstuck, and to prevent it from getting actually stuck by digging that hook point in. Um, so another thing is you can take waders. Be careful. Don't uh, don't jump out in heavy current water or really cold water or anything like that. But if it's a pond or a lake and it's still water, or even easy pockets in a river, um, you can take waders. You can go get them if you need to, but again, that's going to ruin your chances at catching fish. So it's best not to do that. It's best to practice and best to be able to make the cast and be able to pull your bait back without getting it hung up. Um, Another big deal, and this will prevent hangups, is wrong sizes. A lot of times guys are using the wrong size baits. So whether that's crankbaits, spinner baits, jigs, um, plastics, anything like that, people are just using the wrong size, and they're not catching fish, and they're getting hung up because of it. And so the hang up is going to come less of the size of the bait and more of the weight of the bait. So most of the time when you're fishing from the bank, you're going to be fishing 5 feet or less. And when you're fishing 5 foot or less, you don't need anything really heavier than a quarter ounce. And sometimes quarter ounce can even be kind of heavy. So pay attention to the weights that you're using. And if you're using a jig, you want to be using a light jig, a quarter ounce jig, or even an eighth of an ounce. Same thing if you're using a worm. Use the eighth ounce worm, an eighth ounce worm weight, or a 3/16. Those things are going to be key into not getting hung up. If you're throwing a half ounce or an ounce or anything like that in that shallow water, that bait is just going to immediately sink to the bottom, and it's going to stay on bottom throughout your retrieve. It's not going to pop up very much. When you're doing your twitches and stuff, it's just going to kind of scoot on the bottom, and it's going to collect every single thing in its path. And that's how you get hung up. That's going to increase hangups major. And it's also going to lose the action of the bait, and you're not going to get as many bites. So when you're fishing a lot of shallow water, you want lighter weights and smaller baits that are going to look a lot more natural in that shallow water and are going to stay above and not sink down into a lot of the things that would get it hung up. Um, Last thing, wrong retrieves. Guys are using the wrong retrieves all the time. So many people either cast and straight back, or cast and let it sit and just slowly drag back. And either of those are fine and they will catch fish, but mixing up your retrieves is that's being an angler. That's what being a fisherman is. You're trying to coax a fish, a live being, into biting your lure that's fake. So it's not all about just throwing it out there and, oh, they're not biting today. No, try to make them bite. And by doing that, you're going to increase so many bites. You're going to have so much more fun, so many more fish, because you're not just doing the steady straight back routine. It can work, and it's worked for plenty of people, but it's it's not the best. It's not the thing that will get you the most bites. So learn how each bait has its different nuances and its different things that you can do to it. So a spinner bait, you can let it go down to the bottom and slowly retrieve it back. You can pop it by cranking your reel hard twice. You can raise your rod. You can change direction. You can do different things to move that to differentiate that retrieve from a different one. And and I do that kind of stuff all the time. So your first retrieve, it might be straight back. Your second retrieve, you pop it twice. Your third retrieve, you change the angle. You do different things to mix up your retrieve to where it's not just the same thing, just a spinnerbait swimming all the time. Crankbait, same thing. Swim jig, chatterbait, they all look the same if you just pull them back. There's no real difference. So so understand each bait and the best things that it can do. Mix up those retrieves. So if it's a shaky head and you're throwing it out, um, you can drag it. You can pop it twice and let it kind of have a pop and fall. Same thing with a jig. Same thing with a tube. All those bottom baits, you can mix up the retrieves. Moving baits that you're pulling back, like spinner baits, chatterbaits, swim jigs, swim baits, crankbaits, any of that kind of stuff. You can crank it hard twice and then slow. You can lift your rod a little bit. That's going to help it dig or come up. A lot of different things that you can mix up your retrieves, and those are things that will generate so many more strikes. It's a big deal. Um, and then another thing on that is that you want to act real. You want your bait to imitate the real things out there that bass are eating. So whether it's shad, bluegill, worms, crawfish, you want your bait to imitate those things as closely as possible because that's what a bass wants to eat. So whatever bait you're throwing, you want it to look as natural as possible, and your retrieve is a big part in that. So as I was just saying, mix it up, but do things that you think are adding adding real life movements to your bait. So if you're fishing a swim bait or a crankbait and you're casting out to a couple stumps, go ahead and bump that stump. And I know people are going to be like, oh man, that's, you can get hung up doing that. And yeah, you can. You can get hung up doing that. But like I said, you're going to be practicing. You're going to know how to do this without getting hung up. And you're going to cast it to the right spot and you're going to pull it to that stump. And instead of just dragging it right by the stump, go ahead and bump the stump and let your bait bounce off of it. When that crankbait hits a stump and deflects, when the spinnerbait hits a stump and deflects, the blades flash, the crankbait makes some noise, and it looks like a real fleeing baitfish. It looks like a baitfish that was swimming to some cover, saw a bass, and took off. And that is something that a bass has real trouble resisting. The bass wants to go get that. That's its nature. So the bass may not have wanted to eat. And if you just drag something by it, it's like, yeah, whatever. But if you do something like that to where you've created a noise and you've deflected and kind of look like you're fleeing, that's a huge thing. That's one of the biggest deals in fishing is making your bait look like it doesn't want to be eaten by a bass. If if you look like a fish that is trying to flee a bass is going to chase. That's their nature. So really try to engage the natural instinct of a bass as many times as possible. And then lastly, this is just a tip in general. This isn't necessarily specific to bank fishing, but it's the best tip anybody can ever give. Somebody gave it to me, and I do it all the time in my tournaments. And it's always fish like there's a bass looking at your lure. And that's it. Do that. There's nothing that is better for fishing. So that's huge for staying focused. It's huge for um, for being able to get bites, because you're going to impart action on that bait that's the correct action. So if you saw a bass, if you walked up, think about the time that you've seen a bass in the water, and you walked up there and you saw the fish and you cast it out to that fish, and you just kind of thought, you were moving your bait exactly as it should be. You're doing whatever you're supposed to do. You're watching that bass look at it and come up and explore it, and you're doing everything you can to make that bass bite that lure. And maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But that focus, that laser focus that you had, everything that you did to not pull it out of the strike zone too soon, to keep it right there, to twitch it just right, to make it do whatever action it's supposed to do, all that stuff that you did was very much about getting a bite. And if you fish that way all the time, you're going to catch so many more fish. So many more fish, a lot of guys, and it's very easy to cast out there into the water where you can't see anything but the surface, and to fish it incorrectly because you're just kind of going through the motions. You're just bringing it straight back, or you kind of let it go to the bottom, but then you're like, you got tired and waiting, and you just pulled it in. But if you thought, there's a bass looking at it, there's a bass looking at it right now, you're not going to just reel it in. You're going to fish it, and you're going to do what you need to do. And that's what keeps me focused every single time I'm out fishing, whether it's fun fishing or tournament fishing. That's a huge thing. And if you can get that mindset that there's a bass looking at your lure all the time, you'll be a much better fisherman. So those are my tips today. Thanks for watching, and let's tune in for the next one. I'll probably have another one coming out soon, and let's talk fishing again. Thanks, guys.